Chapter 31. Blur. And that's all we can recount about the Fifth Age. The Sixth Age, also known as Setux, has a more intact history than any other age. The wizened elf told Hoplite, as his helmeted head hung low over the root table. They had laid out several plates on the table before Hoplite, each stacked tall with different cuts of meat, every berry he could think of, and all kinds of wine. He had never tasted wine before in his life. He knew it was. Was it alcoholic? Hoplite had never been allowed to drink any kind of alcoholic beverage, so his knowledge of such things was limited. The old elf man seated next to him had to be older than the Harkmother, or even Theopolu, for he was well wrinkled and bent at the back, with a long scraggly white beard that practically hung over his knees. The elf was wearing a dusty gray robe as opposed to an Illimleaf outfit. It matched his professed occupation as lore-keeper. This old elf, Manguin was his name, had been insistent on coming to speak of Arculus to the New Outworlder. Manguin had gone unchallenged by the surrounding elves for hours now, all the way up until the sun had finally set. Hoplite welcomed the old man's attention. After all, when Manguin had come to speak with Hoplite, the other elves bothering him had all backed off to let him speak. From there, Manguin had led a tired Hoplite to this table, toward the center of the crowd. Hoplite had opted to simply fall to his knees next to one of the chairs, as his great weight would have been far too much for the feeble wood to bear. Listening to Manguin speak was interesting. He was a goldmine for intel on Arculus. But oh, how heavy Hoplite's eyes were, and how calming Manguin's aged voice was. Fighting to stay awake had proven to be a difficult battle, but the rewards of intel were well worth the effort. In the Sixth Age, Arculus was ruled over by a dwarven civilization, known as the Romai, Manguin continued. We know that they ruled over the other races with an iron fist, and that their rulers were immortal. These rulers were known as the Ten, and there is evidence to suggest that these 10 had been afflicted with an advanced form of vampirism, as several preserved Romai corpses have been found to possess sharp fangs, something non-standard for dwarven skeletons from any other age. These Romai tombs seem to have been reserved for only the highest ranking in Romai society. The more lavish the tomb, the higher the chance of a vampiric skeleton, Manguin said, stroking his long beard as he leaned a little closer to Hoplite's helmet. Are you awake? Hoplite hesitated before answering. Affirmative. Manguin nodded, knitting his brows together before wetting his lips. That was the last anyone has seen of a pure-blooded dwarf, vampiric or not. The modern-day dwarves you see are now the result of their diminished population interbreeding with humans at the beginning of the Seventh Age, which is why they are both larger and shorter-lived than they used to be. Vampiric dwarves? That sounded preposterous, absolutely unthinkable, and outright stupid. Every bit of intel is potentially important. Never write off information that seems superfluous at a glance. The voice of Commander echoed from the past. Hoplite cursed himself for not having followed that advice as well as he should have when he had first landed on Arculus. Vampiric dwarves from 4 ages ago didn't seem all too important, true, but Commander would have kept it in mind just in case. After all, what if something relevant to these alleged vampire dwarfs came up in the future? Hoplite should learn all he could from these Sixth Age Romai from Manguin, if not to help engross himself in Arculus's history, then to keep away the flocks of elves with their annoying questions for longer. You said there aren't any more pure-blooded dwarves left? Hoplite asked. Was this because their population was targeted specifically by the Pillarborn who was about to ascend in that age? Manguin smiled at Hoplite, much like a tutor to a favorite student before answering. Yes, that's exactly right, Manguin confirmed, wetting his lips again. Oros, the now pillar god of justice, in his madness committed genocide against the Romai civilization for all the wrongs they had committed against not only him, but the rest of the world. Hoplite knitted his brow and shook his head. How is it justice to genocide an entire race? You said Oros ascended to be the god of justice, but genocide isn't selective. Oros would have slaughtered non-combatants to decimate a population in such a way, Hoplite said, the tiredness in his voice barely suppressed. In his mind, condemning dwarven genocide seemed almost like hypocrisy. After all, Turner had wiped out entire species of aliens for the resources their planets possessed. Hardly justice, certainly, but the needs of mankind were ever growing. Many soldiers seemed to think that hoplites served Turna in this way. Yet that was far from the truth. Hoplites had never been made for such a task. A hoplite took on many roles in the Eighth Arm, true, but they were always used for more important operations than planet clearing. Genocide was the job of the Third Arm, also known as Dark Watch. Menguin knitted his brows as his frown deepened. Indeed, Oros' sense of justice had been completely twisted by his madness. Throughout his life, the Roma had oppressed not only your kind, the humans, but every other race on Arculus. In his diminished mental state, it is theorized that Oros had believed himself to be doing right by the world. Only by exterminating the Romae could Arculus finally be free of them. Which he did to great effect, Menguin said, running his fingers through his long beard. Hoplite stared at the long drape of hair hanging off of Menguin's face for a moment. No other elf he had seen had any kind of facial hair. Could it be possible that Menguin possessed some dwarven heritage? He was a tad on the shorter end. But wait, why was Hoplite so curious about this? Perhaps it tied into what Menguin had said earlier about the dwarves intermixing with humans. But there were other races that existed. Why not interbreed with elves as well? Were dwarves only capable of reproducing with human beings? Do not ask about sex. He remembered Lance's words. Hoplite would not ask about sex. He would wait until the party was over. For now, he had another question in mind. One about the Pillarborn. What makes a Pillarborn go insane? He asked. Physically, they seem beyond healthy. Menguin paused for a moment, seeming to gather his thoughts before taking a deep breath. The power of their divine blood grows as they perform greater and greater feats. This divinity, however, has a drawback. Blood from the mortal and the divine conflict, and while it enhances their bodies, it slowly degrades their mental well-being. It always ends the same way, assuming the Pillarborn survives to reach apotheosis. Once the godling reaches their apex, the very brink of godhood, they are always taken by what is known as the madness of ascension, Menguin explained. The mixed bloods of mortal and god are at constant war with one another, but naturally the divine halves always prevail over their mortality, thus triggering ascension to a pillar. The elf standing around Hoplite and Menguin seemed to grow somewhat irate as Menguin wet his lips. They glared at the elder with narrowed eyes, as if to say, "You've had your time with him, let us have a turn." Menguin took notice of this and rolled his eyes, shaking his head and running a hand through his long beard. "I fear that they wish me gone. The peace dulls slowly as the night goes on, so their patience is now beginning to show some cracks. Do you feel it, Hoplite?" Menguin asked. "The dulling of the peace?" Hoplite simply shook his head. He might have felt just a tad less lazy, but otherwise his instincts only screamed at him to sleep or eat. "We may take a break if you wish. You seem tired. I'm sure you could get away with a short snooze," Menguin told him, the words sounding like pure honey to his ears. A nap sounded wonderful. Shut off the noise receptors to his suit and just pass out. But then he'd lose out on potentially crucial intel. Just a couple more questions. Then he would take a quick rest. "Why aren't there more gods?" he asked, Menguin giving a pleased smile as Hoplite continued in a drowsy tone. "There have been 9 ages before this one, but you say that there are 12 pillar gods. You said earlier that there are always about 200 Pillarborn at the end of each age. Shouldn't there be more gods than just 12? "Only one," Menguin said, lifting a finger. "There can only be one that can ascend at the end of the age. Only when all other contenders are slain can one rise to the pillars. The contest up until apotheosis is destructive, yes. A godling war tears Arculus asunder. But the ascension itself is what brings an end to the age that gave a Pillarborn life." "So why are there 12 and not 9? Hoplite asked. "The first 3 pillar gods created Arculus. They never participated in the contest to become deities. They simply were," Menguin answered. "The first age came to an end when the Pillarborn appeared, and every age has followed suit. When demigods are born, it is a sign of the end times." So Pillarborn only appear when it's the end of an era, Hoplite said with a nod, his eyes slowly beginning to shut as he spoke. Hoplite then stood from his seat, the surrounding elves staring at him hopefully, likely waiting for him to turn around to greet them. Hoplite engaged the maglocks to his armor and went limp, the phalanx suit not budging an inch from its standing position. To outside observers, Hoplite looked to be standing tall before the table. But in truth, he was getting ready to take a nap. He was too tired to stay awake now. Manguin's voice was simply too relaxing to bear, even over the noise of the surrounding party. Manguin lifted an eyebrow but continued. Yes, meaning that this is the end of Takuma, he said after a short pause. But I have hope now. After all, no mortal, outworlder or no, has ever slain a Pillarborn. Perhaps you... He paused, just as Hoplite's eyes finally shut. Perhaps you can save us, Hoplite. Michael laughed as he chugged back another glass of wine, the happy head feel growing ever heavier as the dizzy water sat warmly in his stomach. Only one of the two elf girls remained from the pair that had essentially kidnapped him earlier. They had been at it for a few hours, following Michael around the party to different tables, with both gradually looking more irritated as they went. Michael knew why they were mad. After all, he still hadn't confirmed or denied that he was an outworlder. He breathed in the cool night air, relieved that the elves had seen fit to keep the party lit with floating blue orbs of light. Those orbs kept the looming darkness of night at bay, well away from Michael. With how at ease he was, that darkness surrounding the root bowl seemed less threatening, like a small spider you'd find outside. No real point in squishing a spider if it was outdoors, right? No point stressing over darkness if it wasn't bothering him. Michael found a chair before the root table, plopping down in it with a drunken giggle, before grabbing a plate and slapping a still-steaming steak atop it. If only Nasty Nate were here to party with him. Michael again found himself hoping that somehow Nathan had survived. He knew deep down, though, that he shouldn't get his hopes up. It never ended well when he did. Michael? The elf girl asked, leaning atop a nearby root table, right next to a gigantic pile of leaves. Summer illum leaves, relatively small ones that had fallen from the great tree, ever looming overhead. Apparently they made for great appetizers on their own, but Michael wouldn't be munching on raw leaves anytime soon. He wasn't no damn dinosaur. The meat they had laying around on the tables had been just fine. A good steak, or 5, did wonders for an empty gut. Why waste time on leaves? The elf girl cleared her throat loudly, staring with an irritated intensity that made Michael somewhat nervous. She locked eyes with Michael, twirling the wine in her glass before continuing. What is your world like? Did you and Hoplite know each other before he arrived on Arculus? She asked, leaning ever so slightly closer to Michael while maintaining that almost glare. Crazy Chick didn't even blink as she mad-dogged Michael, and that was when he remembered. Elves could read your mind or some crap. Wait, not minds, emotions. It required eye contact, though, from what he could remember, so he not so subtly looked to his armored feet. Man, I tell you what, that wine went straight to my head, Michael told her. Real good stuff. Sure Moreau would have loved it. Michael thought he heard a small irritated huff from her. He had already been well informed about Moreau from the other elf girl that had been with them before she had vanished into the crowd. He had no idea why the second girl had left. Maybe she was going to look for Lance? Michael wasn't sure if Lance would spill the beans on him, but if this milling crowd was anything to go by, it would be like finding a needle in a very large shifting haystack. He would have, she said simply. You and Hoplite must have gone through much together ever since you both landed in our forest. Michael lifted a brow, looking back up into her eyes to show her the confusion he felt. She seemed taken aback for a moment as she read his eyes. She didn't know that Michael and Hoplite had crashed separately. Maybe the confusion on display in his eyes could help dissuade the elf from interrogating him any further. Michael stood and leaned in closer, looming over her with a frown. If the surrounding crowd of elves took offense at their sudden closeness, they did not show it. Indeed, they seemed well into the drink at this point, laughing and shoving one another or eating and singing, sometimes all of these things at once. "Why are you bothering me so much?" Michael asked. "You got something to gain?" "That's none of your business," she huffed, turning her head away from him. Michael grinned. "And where I come from is none of yours, hon," he told her in a calm tone. A sound like that of an almost suppressed growl emanated from her throat, and Michael couldn't help but snicker at her frustration. The peace he had felt seemed to have faded just a tad as the night carried on. Maybe that was why he was getting irritated. Her patience had to be wearing thin after the runaround Michael had been giving her. She began slowly after taking another small sip of wine. "I just want to know." "Why did you try giving me that crap about the Hark Mommy telling you already then? What do you got to gain from knowing? You're gonna harvest my organs or something?" Michael asked, causing her to gasp in shock, blue eyes going wide. "I guess the allure of otherworldly guts gotta attract some weirdos. They'd probably pay you pretty well." "I get it. Get me drunk, lead me away from the party with some eye-batting, harvest my organs. Well, it's not the first time someone's tried, but you're by far the worst at it." The wine glass shattered in her hand, wine spilling down her hand and forearm as a vein popped on her forehead. "I don't want to do any such thing," she spat, drawing the attention of the surrounding crowd. "Just forget it," she finished, casting the wine glass to the dirt and turning from him sharply. Some of the crimson that dribbled down to the dark soil from her hand wasn't just wine. Michael grabbed her hand, eliciting a shocked cry from her, before he pulled her back to him, lifting her hand to his face to inspect her palm. She struggled to pull away from Michael, but his grip was iron. "Quit," Michael told her flatly. "You got a shard stuck in your hand. Here, sit down." She sputtered almost unintelligibly as he leaned over her hand, the surrounding crowd now still around the two of them. Michael heard some confused muttering from the observers. Maybe at first they thought he was being aggressive, but seeing him scrutinize her now clearly bleeding hand likely stopped anyone from coming to pull Michael away. "Alrighty, gotta pull it out right quick," Michael told her, her face going pale as she located the shard in the center of her palm. "Calm down, just a small piece. What's your name?" Michael asked her. She blinked, looking up from the shard of glass in her hand, which was most certainly not a small piece. In truth, that was what Michael had wanted her to do. No point in her staring at it, after all. And he really didn't know her name. "Lena," she said quietly, keeping her eyes firmly above her hand. With that, he ripped out the glass shard, tossing it onto the table, as Lena gave a small cry of pain. Without a word, Michael grabbed one of the pitchers from the table. After confirming that it was indeed water and not wine, began pouring it onto the wound. She drew breath in sharply through her teeth, the water rinsing off the wound. After that was done, he set the pitcher back on the table and reached into his tack pouch. After a bit of digging, he pulled out a bandage roll and some cotton. He wasn't a medic, but he knew it was all right to pack an open wound as long as it wasn't on the torso. Michael heard the partygoers go on about their revelry as Michael finished wrapping up the bandage around Lena's hand, putting what was left of the roll back into his pouch with a smile. "Good as new. Don't go squishing glass. What the hell were you thinking?" Michael asked. "I was just joking about harvesting my organs." Lena lightly squeezed her hand, her frown deepening, as she refused to meet his gaze. "Thank you. I apologize for the inconvenience," she said after a moment. "But you angered me greatly." "Look, Lena," Michael said in a slurring voice. "You gotta quit being shady about getting what you want." She frowned, staring deeply into his eyes a moment before looking away. "We needed Outworlder's blood," Lena said quietly. "I and my sister study the bodies formed from Zod's blood. We have intrinsic knowledge of most races' biologies, including humans. But no one has ever studied Outworlder biology before. Really, the blood was just the first thing we were going to ask for. We want to do a full physical exam. Take some hair, toenails, boogers, whatever." Michael frowned, leaning back in his chair as he stared deep into Lena's eyes. He may not have been able to read emotions, but he could tell that she was dead serious. Did they have some kind of magic microscope or something? What was the purpose of this? Were they going to make Michael clones? There was only room for one space dumbass on Arculus. Michael didn't want any more of himself running around. Unless this was just purely for education. And she did say full examination. What did that entail exactly? He stroked his beard a moment, biting his cheek as he thought. What would be so wrong with letting some elven cuties play nurse on him? Well, first off, maybe they wanted to harvest his organs after all. Lead him away and cut him up. Again, not the first time someone had tried. He'd maintained caution for now, till he was sure they weren't after his giblets. Why were you being so shady about it? Michael asked Lena, lifting a brow. Because you don't open a conversation with, "Hey, can I have some blood?" That would have sent you running for sure. We wanted to butter you up. Lead with some casual conversation about frogs or some such, before determining your origin, Lena told him. We aren't exactly good at social functions. Yeah, I can tell, Michael said flatly, refilling his glass with more wine before downing it all in one go. How much blood? Michael asked in a slow slur, his thoughts becoming muddy in his growing drunkenness. Wait, had Hoplite ordered him to not get drunk? Michael couldn't remember. Surely the big guy would just cut him a little slack, right? Just a single drop, she said urgently, leading close to him. That's all we want if you're unwilling to do the examination. My sister may have gone to ask Hoplite himself if he would be willing to submit himself for examination. He's going to say no for sure, Michael said with a shake of his head. If she goes asking him that, 37 will probably think she wants to kill him. We better go find her before she gets the chance to ask. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you're new here, welcome aboard. Check out the description for the story, and join the Discord if you like. Consider supporting the channel and the author as well. It's a dangerous world out there, but remember to be brave and look up to seek the stars.